He had $50, borrowed, from his dad. And today, his name is on the shoes of every athlete on the planet. But here's what nobody tells you. This man almost lost everything. Not once, not twice, but over and over and over again. And every single time, something inside him refused to die. This is not a story about shoes. This is a story about obsession, betrayal, near bankruptcy, a waffle iron, a $35 logo, and one of the most audacious bets in the history of American business. This is the real story of Phil Knight, the quiet, shy, running kid from Portland, Oregon, who looked at the entire world and decided he was going to change it. Born February 24, 1938, in Portland, Phil Knight grew up in a middle-class home where his father was a lawyer turned newspaper publisher. From the outside, it looked like a comfortable life. But inside Phil, something was burning, something restless, something that couldn't sit still. His father, wanting to teach him self-reliance, refused to give him a job at his own newspaper. So what did young Phil do? He got up every single morning before dawn, worked the shift at the rival paper, The Oregonian, tabulating sports scores, and then, instead of taking a bus home, he ran 7 miles back. Every single day. 7 miles. That detail matters. Because Phil Knight never looked for the easy road. He was always running towards something most people couldn't even see yet. At the University of Oregon, he wasn't the star student, wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He was the quiet kid on the track team, clocking a personal best mile of 4 minutes and 13 seconds, which is elite, genuinely elite, and working under the most obsessive, brilliant shoe. Tinkering coach in American college history, a man named Bill Bowerman. Now remember that name, Bill Bowerman, because without him, there is no Nike, there is no Swoosh, there is nothing. But we'll get to that. Phil graduates in 1959 with a business degree, does his Army service, and then, and this is where it gets interesting, he gets into Stanford's Graduate School of Business. And in one small business class, he writes a paper that will eventually be worth $30 billion. The paper asks a simple but devastating question. Can Japanese sports shoes do to German sports shoes what Japanese cameras did to German cameras? Think about that. In 1962, Adidas and Puma owned the athletic shoe world. Germany dominated. And this 24-year-old kid from Portland is sitting in a classroom writing that a cheap, high-quality Japanese shoe could blow the whole market wide open. His professors gave it a decent grade. But Phil believed it with every fiber of his being. So he did something insane. After graduating Stanford, instead of taking a safe corporate job, he bought a plane ticket and flew to Japan. He walked into the factory of Onitsuka Company, makers of the Tiger brand shoe, and here is the twist that will make your jaw drop. He told them he already had a company. A U.S. distributor. An established operation ready to sell their shoes across the entire Western United States. The company's name? Blue Ribbon Sports. He made it up on the spot. Standing in that factory in Kobe, Japan, with almost no money, no business, no employees, Phil Knight invented Blue Ribbon Sports out of thin air and walked out with an exclusive deal. The nerve. The absolute nerve of this man. He orders sample pairs, flies home, and now he has to actually build the thing he just lied about. But the samples take over a year to arrive. So what does Phil do in the meantime? He works as an accountant at Coopers and Lybrand, teaches accounting at Portland State University, and here's a twist inside the twist. It's in that classroom where he meets a student named Penny Parks, who becomes his wife, his partner, and the quiet engine behind everything he builds for the rest of his life. Finally, in January 1964, the Tiger samples arrive. Phil mails a pair to his old coach Bill Bowerman for feedback, expecting maybe a thank you note. Instead, Bowerman writes back and says, "I want in. 50-50. Let's build this together." January 25th, 1964. That handshake, that $500 each, $1,000 total, that is the birth of Blue Ribbon Sports, the company that will one day become Nike. $1,000. That's it. That's the whole war chest. Phil starts selling Tiger shoes out of the trunk of his green Plymouth Valiant at track meets across the Pacific Northwest. He's not a salesman. He's shy, quiet, almost awkward with strangers. But when he talks about shoes, when he talks about running, something in him comes alive. And people feel it. They buy. In the first year, he grosses $8,000. $8,000. And he thinks, this is real. This is actually real. But here's where the pain starts. Because growing a business with no money is like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. Every time Blue Ribbon Sports made money, they needed to order more shoes, which needed more cash, which they didn't have, which meant they had to beg banks for loans, which banks almost always refused, because who lends money to a guy selling Japanese sneakers from a car trunk? Phil is constantly, chronically, dangerously short of cash. He borrows from his parents, he pleads with his bank, he does accounting work on the side just to keep the lights on. The stress is unreal. His banker, a man named Harry White at First National Bank of Oregon, becomes both his lifeline and his nightmare. Sometimes approving loans, sometimes calling them in at the worst possible moment, leaving Phil scrambling for money with days, sometimes hours, to spare. And yet, the numbers keep growing. By 1969, Blue Ribbon Sports hits $1 million in sales. $1 million. And Phil quits his day jobs to go all in. This is the moment of no return. But just as things are accelerating, a bombshell drops. Onitsuka Tiger, the Japanese company that's been supplying their shoes, starts secretly negotiating with other American distributors behind Phil's back. They're trying to cut him out, to steal what he built, to replace him. Phil finds out. And instead of collapsing, instead of playing it safe, he decides to burn the bridge himself. He severs the relationship with Onitsuka and announces that Blue Ribbon Sports is making its own shoe, their own brand, from scratch. It's 1971. They need a name, they need a logo. They have almost no money.
I don't love it.
Jeff Johnson, their first full-time employee, a guy so devoted he was selling shoes out of a van and sending Phil obsessive letters about shoe design every single week, Jeff wakes up one night from a dream and calls Phil with one word: Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Phil hates it. He literally says, I don't love it. But they're out of time and out of options. Nike it is. For the logo, the now iconic swoosh, they hire a graphic design student from Portland State named Carolyn Davidson and pay her $35. $35 for one of the most recognized symbols in human history. Phil's exact reaction when he sees, I don't love it, but it will grow on me. It grew on him. Years later, after Nike goes public and Carolyn Davidson has received nothing from the explosion of wealth she helped create, Phil quietly tracks her down, throws her a party, and gives her a gold swoosh ring and a block of Nike stock. That moment, quiet, private, loyal, that moment tells you exactly who Phil Knight is. Now, in 1972, Nike shoes debut at the U.S. Olympic Trials in Eugene, Oregon. And right around this same time, Bill Bowerman, the obsessive genius coach, is standing in his kitchen on a Sunday morning, staring at his wife's waffle iron. And he has an idea. What if the sole of a running shoe had a waffle pattern? More grip. Less weight. He literally pours rubber into a waffle iron, ruins it completely, his wife is furious, and creates the waffle sole, one of the most innovative shoe designs of the decade. That's the Nike spirit. A waffle iron and a mad scientist. Brilliant and chaotic all at once. Nike grows. Revenues climb. The brand starts to develop a cult following among runners. But Phil Knight is still running out of money constantly, still fighting banks, still operating on the razor's edge of disaster. In 1975, a Japanese trading company called Nisho Iwai becomes a crucial financial partner, injecting the cash flow Phil desperately needs. And then, 1980. Nike goes public on the New York Stock Exchange. In one day, Phil Knight becomes a paper millionaire many times over, the trunk of the car guy, the accountant who faked a company in a Japanese factory, the runner who refused to take the bus home. now a millionaire. But the biggest twist, the one that changes everything, is still coming. 1984. Nike approaches a 21-year-old basketball player from North Carolina named Michael Jordan. Now here's what you have to understand. Phil Knight did not want to sign Michael Jordan. Jordan was a basketball player, and Nike was a running shoe company. Knight's people had to drag him into that deal. Jordan's agent demanded $5 million over 5 years and a signature shoe line. Nike's executives thought it was too much, too risky. Jordan himself wanted Adidas. He was a lifelong Adidas kid. But Adidas passed. And somehow, reluctantly, Nike signed him. The Air Jordan launched in 1985. The NBA immediately banned the shoe because it violated their uniform color rules, fining Jordan $5,000 every single time he wore them. Nike paid every fine. And every fine was free advertising. The Air Jordan line generated over $126 million in its first 1 year. That's not a business deal. That's a supernova. Just Do It follows in 1988. 3 words that become the most powerful tagline in sports history. A philosophy, a movement, a battle cry for every human being who ever doubted themselves. Nike overtakes Adidas as the world's #1 athletic shoe brand by 1990. Annual revenues blow past $1 billion, then $5 billion, then $10 billion. Phil Knight has built an empire. But here's the part the highlight reels always skip: the dark chapter. The chapter that almost destroyed everything. In the mid-1990s, investigative journalists and labor activists begin publishing devastating reports about the factories in Asia where Nike's shoes are made. 16-hour workdays. Poverty wages. Child labor. Workers in Vietnam making less than $2 a day. Workers in Indonesia afraid to speak up. Nike becomes, overnight, the face of everything wrong with globalization. Protesters burn Nike shoes outside stores. College students demand their universities cut Nike contracts. Phil Knight is booed at his own alma mater. And for years, and this is the damning part, Nike's initial response is defensive, dismissive. PR spin. Knight says the factories aren't technically Nike's. He says it's the contractor's responsibility. The world doesn't buy it. The backlash builds and builds until May 1998, when Phil Knight stands before a room of journalists and says words that nobody expected. The Nike product has become synonymous with slave wages, forced overtime, and arbitrary abuse. He says it out loud. He owns it. And then he announces reforms, raises minimum worker age, improves factory air quality standards, brings in independent monitors. It's not perfect. Critics say it's still not enough. But the direction changes. And Phil Knight, for the first time, stops running from the darkness and turns to face it. That courage, uncomfortable, painful, very public courage, is part of his story too. In 2004, Phil Knight steps down as CEO after 4 decades. Nike's annual revenue stands above $32 billion. The quiet kid who ran 7 miles home from work every morning has built one of the most powerful companies on the planet. But the universe isn't done testing him. That same year, Phil's son Matthew, 34 years old, healthy and full of life, dies in a scuba diving accident in El Salvador. Just like that. Gone. Phil Knight, who had fought banks and partners and governments and protesters and his own doubts for 40 years, is broken open by grief in a way that none of that ever could. And if you've read his memoir, Shoe Dog, published in 2016, and you should, you can feel it on every page. The rawness, the gratitude, the ache. Shoe Dog becomes a New York Times bestseller. Not because it's a business book, because it's brutally, uncomfortably human. It tells the story of near bankruptcy after near bankruptcy, of relationships that made or broke everything, of a team he called the Butt Faces, his original inner circle who would meet and argue and laugh and grind together in the chaotic early years, and it ends not in triumph, but in reflection. In grief and gratitude existing side by side, because that's real life. Meanwhile, Phil pours his wealth into changing the world. He gives over $100 million to fund the Knight Cancer Institute at Oregon Health and Science University in 2008. Then $500 million more in 2013. And then, in August 2025, he pledges $2 billion to OSU. $2 billion. The largest single gift ever made to a university or academic health center in American history. His total giving to the University of Oregon exceeds $2.2 billion. His total giving to Stanford exceeds $580 million. His total lifetime philanthropic giving, several billion dollars and rising. The guy who scraped together $500 to start a shoe company has given away more money than most countries spend on healthcare. And here's the final twist, the one that wraps everything together. Phil Knight's son Travis, the one who survived, who grew up watching his dad build empires, didn't go into shoes or business. He became an animator. He runs Leica, the stop-motion animation studio his father saved from bankruptcy and funded with over $180 million. Leica made Coraline, Paranorman, Kubo, and the Two Strings. Beautiful, strange, soulful films about outsiders, about kids who don't fit in, about the magic hidden inside ordinary-looking things. Which, if you think about it, is exactly what Phil Knight saw in a cheap Japanese running shoe in 1962 when the rest of the world saw nothing. Magic inside an ordinary thing. As of 2026, Phil Knight is 88 years old. His net worth sits somewhere between $28 and $35 billion. Nike generates $46 billion in annual revenue. The swoosh that costs $35 is now one of the most valuable logos in existence. And somewhere out there right now, someone is lacing up a pair of Nikes before a run, before a game, before the most important moment of their day, never knowing that it all started with a kid running 7 miles home in the dark, a borrowed $500, a lie told in a Japanese factory, and an obsession that simply refused to quit. Phil Knight didn't build Nike because he had money. He built it because he had something money can never buy, the absolute, irrational, bone-deep certainty that he was right. Ran toward that certainty every single day, even when the banks said no, even when the partners betrayed him, even when the world turned against him, even when grief tried to stop him. He just kept running. He always just kept running.